One of the greatest powers of Adobe InDesign is its ability to create templates and streamline production of documents that we'll be producing on a regular basis. This chapter of our Total Training InDesign CS6 Essentials course deals with how to streamline the production of documents that we'll be creating again and again. We'll be working with InDesign templates, paragraph and character styles, as well as how to create complementary color palettes that we can use for producing documents that we create on a recurring basis quickly and efficiently. In this chapter of our InDesign CS6 course, we're going to create a document template that we're going to use to build a trifold brochure in the next chapter of our InDesign course. To do that, let's first go to the Welcome screen here and click on the Create New Document button. When I click on that, it should open the New Document dialog box just as you see right here. Now, if you've been following the lesson sequentially, you may see that the document preset is set for the TT card flyer that we built in Chapter 2. Let's switch that back to default. And if you're working with an American English version of what we're working with, what you'll see is that that'll set that as a letter size document. We're going to change the number of pages from 1 to 2, since we'll be printing on the front and the back of our trifold brochure. And since we're not going to be binding these, they're actually only going to be two sides of the same sheet of paper, we can turn off the Facing Pages option. Now, again, as we created the default setting, it set the page for a letter size sheet. We're going to put that landscape so it shows as a width of 11 inches and then a height of 8.5 inches for our standard letter size sheet. If you drop a ruler on your standard trifold brochure, you'll often find that that's set a little bit smaller than your standard letter size sheet to account for extra room for bleeds or trimming away that impression that printing goes all the way to the very edge of the brochure. When standard size for working with brochures is a width of not 11 inches, but 10.5 inches, and a standard height for that is set for 8.25 inches. Notice the moment we change from that standard letter size page that the page size turns into custom. Basically what that means is it doesn't correspond to any of the presets that we have listed inside the page size options box. We'll go back to columns here in just a second. But before we do anything here, we're going to work with the margins that are immediately below. Now, we're going to set a default margin of 1/8 of an inch, or 0.125 inches. And you'll notice that the link button here is selected. So when I hit the Tab key, it's going to change the margins all the way around to 1/8 of an inch. We're going to make a different set of margins for the left and right side of our page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unclick this link button, and I'm going to change the margins to the left and to the right to 1/4 inch. Let's go back to the columns section, and we're going to change the number of columns from 1 to 3 to account for our standard trifold brochure. And we're going to change the gutter from the default of 0.1667 or 1/6 of an inch or 1 pica to be twice the size of whatever our left and right side margins are for our trifold brochure. So that shows as 0.25 inches or 1/4 inch. To double that for our gutter that we're going to set in between each of those 3 columns or panels that we're designing for our trifold brochure, we're going to make that 1/2 of an inch or 0.5 inches. Now, if you don't have the bleed and slug section showing below, all you have to do is click on the More Options button in our new document dialog box. That'll bring that back up. And we're going to set a bleed area of 0.125 or 1/8 of an inch all the way around the trim size for our trifold brochure template. Now again, you'll see that the link is selected, so when I hit the Tab key, it's going to change all of those bleed settings to 0.125 inches, or 1/8 of an inch, all the way around. As we're looking at this, we have the ability to work with the basics of our trifold brochure. Let's review that very quickly. What you want to have are 2 pages, no facing pages option, a custom page size of 10.5 inches wide by 8.25 inches high. We want 3 columns to be set with a gutter space of 1/2 inch, or twice what the size of the corresponding margins are set below. In our case here, of 1/4 inch to the left and right of our page. We've set tighter margins of 1/8 of an inch high and low to account for a standard live area within our sheet, and we've set a standard bleed of 1/8 of an inch, or 0.125 inches, all the way around that page trim size. Now, we're going to do some more work here for building our trifold brochure template. So it's not really necessary for us to save a document preset for this, but if we chose to do that, it's very easy. We just click on the Save Preset button, and what that would do is that would allow us to save that preset as a TT trifold brochure. If I say OK, just as we did with our card flyer in the earlier chapter, it would save a document preset that we could come back to time and time again when we're working with new documents. I'm just going to say OK, and when I do that, I'll have my trifold brochure set up. If I go to the Pages dialog box, I'll see that I have page 1 and I have page 2. Both of them have the A master applied to the document. And I've got the basic setting for my trifold brochure. Now, I don't want that brochure preset that we had before. We want to get rid of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the File pull-down menu. I'm going to go to Document Presets, and I'm not going to select the card flyer that we created or the trifold brochure that we created right now. I'm going to go to the Define menu command. I'm going to click on that trifold brochure. Since we have an incomplete template here and I don't really want to work with this, I'm simply going to delete that. It's going to ask me with a redundant command whether I want to delete that selected preset. That's absolutely what I want to do, so I'm going to say OK. And I'll see that that's now not available anymore in the document presets. When I click the OK button, we'll be ready to start building. We're going to set up the pages for our trifold brochure template. Now, to do that, we've already created a new document, that one that we built in the last unit. And we can see, as the Pages panel is up, that we've created 1, 2 document pages, and we have a single master page that rides over both of those. So I'm going to double click on the A master page, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a couple of folding lines that I'm going to use for designing my trifold brochure template. I'm going to go into the vertical ruler, and when I put my cursor in here and hold the mouse button down, you'll see it changes into a bar with arrows pointing left and right. And as I drag this onto the screen, what it'll do is it'll allow me to place a ruler guide for where the first fold is going to come between the first and second panels of our trifold brochure template. Now, I know I've hit the exact right point there, because if I look into the control panel to the upper left here of our screen, I'll see that's set at 3.5 inches. If I look at the horizontal ruler, I'll see that the tick mark between 3 and 4 is at exactly 3.5 inches, because the tick mark disappears there on the ruler. And then finally, I'll get a little indicator right next to my cursor that shows on my X factor, or X dimension if you will, that I'm set at 3.5 inches. I'm going to release the mouse button now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to set a second ruler guide at 7 inches. Again, I'll know I hit the exact right spot because as I look at the control panel, it shows I'm at 7 inches. If I look at the horizontal ruler, I'll see that the tick mark disappears right next to 7, and that if I look at the little proxy view just to the right of my cursor, it shows I'm at exactly 7 inches. So when I release the mouse button, we'll have set the fold lines for the first and second panels of our trifold brochure, and then for the second and third panels of our trifold brochure. Now, as I've built this on the master page, what I'll see if I double click on page 1 is that I have the same information. If I double click on page 2, once again, I'll see I have the exact same information. I'm going to go back to page 1, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to account for a common problem that most people have when they design trifold brochures. But since you're taking this Total Training in Design course, I can show you how to avoid it. Now, you may remember when I did the introduction for this chapter that when I folded those 3 panels together, they kind of bowed out in the middle. It didn't sit flat. It didn't sit very cleanly. That often happens when you set 3 panels, first, second, and third panels of exactly the same size. What experienced designers do to keep that from bowing out and that trifold brochure to sit nice and flat is that they'll slightly reduce the size of the panel that folds inside, what's known as the gatefold or peekaboo panel. So it fits within the area that will be folded for the back panel and the cover panel for our trifold brochure. The way I do that working with InDesign CS6 is I use the page tool right here. If you're working with a single column tools panel, it's the 3rd button down from the top. If you're working in the 2 column panel, it would be the 2nd from the top on the left hand side. Also, before we make any adjustments, look at your reference point locator on the left side of the control panel, right above the tool panel here, and make sure you have the right reference point selected like I do. Your center point may be selected by default. I'm going to go back for that single column tool panel, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the size of the page that I'm working with right here. Now, I can do that by dragging from these handles, just like so, but that's a difficult thing to do to make it precisely right. I'll often find it's a lot easier when I'm changing the sizes of the page to do that with precise numerical control working from my control panel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the frame of reference here from the right side, and I'm going to reduce the size of this entire page from 10.5 inches to 10 3/8 and 10.375 inches. And when I hit the tab key, we'll see that that is narrowed just a little bit, but you'll notice that those nice folding lines that we set on the page here are now skewed. They're distorted. They're no longer in the center of those column gutters that define our 3 panels. We need to fix that by adjusting our margins a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my selection tool and get that right here from the tools panel. To go to the layout pull down menu, I'm going to go to margins and columns, and I'm going to change the left side margin from 1/4 inch to 1/8 of an inch, basically taking out that difference that we set for the margin before. And when I say OK, you'll notice that it takes my ruler guides and once again places them smack in the center for those fold lines we want between our 3 panels. Now I have another complication that's come into play here. You'll notice if I look at this far left panel, my peekaboo panel, if I'm doing a rollover fold for my trifold brochure, that this is no longer centered inside of this panel. I need to give this a little bit of a cheat. And I'm going to do that by first zooming in close so I can see what I'm working with. I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Command 4 since I'm working on the Mac platform. If you're working with a Windows PC, what you'd want to do is you'd want to use the keyboard shortcut Control 4 to go for that 400% display view. I'm going to move over to the left-hand column here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take half of that 1/8 of an inch difference, or 1/16 of an inch. In decimal terms, that's 0.0625, and make the adjustments for this panel. I'm going to go over here one more time to my vertical ruler, and I'm going to drag a vertical ruler guide 1 tick mark, or 1/16 of an inch. That's 0.1875 for 3/16 of an inch from the page trim. I'm going to do the same thing, once again going back to my vertical ruler, and I'm going to drag that over 1/16 of an inch, just like so. And that's going to set up a faux column that's going to be centered for that shorter or gatefold panel that I'm building. Let me go back to the fit and window view by going Command 0, since I'm working on the Mac platform for this chapter. If you're working with a Windows PC, your keyboard shortcut would be Control 0 to get back to our fit and window view. Now we've set up the first page for our trifold brochure. Let's go to the second page by simply double-clicking on it in the Pages panel. We could have also changed that right down here to the lower left-hand corner of our document window. And what we've done here is we've set up this page that we're going to build inside our trifold brochure. Now, I'm going to change the rules just a little bit. We set the front of the brochure for a landscape view. So when I take a look at it, it reads as a very vertical piece. I want to do the same thing. I want to see this page inside vertically. And the way that I can do that is by either going in here to the page icon that I've got in my Pages panel and right-clicking if I have a 2-button or more button mouse, or if I'm working on a Mac with a single button mouse, I'd hold down the Control key and then click to open up the flyaway menu. Another way I can do that is I can go to the flyaway menu here for the Pages panel. I'm going to go to Page Attributes, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate the spread view, or this page, and I'm going to rotate that 90 degrees counterclockwise. So when I click on that, it's going to take this page and it's going to rotate that from a landscape or wide view to a portrait or a tall view. I'm going to go Command 0 once again to go to that fit and window view. If you're working on a Windows PC, Control 0 will do the same thing. And as I look at this, I can see this page shows up and down, but also if I look at it here, I'll see that the page is still laid out as far as InDesign is concerned as a landscape page. It's just turned it around so I can see that and I can design vertically for the inside of my trifold brochure. Now, again, I need to account for that gatefold information that we had before. So I'm going to go back to my Pages tool. I'm going to work from the top down. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the width, or in this case as it appears, height of that page, okay, from 10.5 inches to 10.375. And as I do that, it's going to once again skew where those folding lines are as we see them clearly working with the inside of our trifold brochure template. I'm going to go back to the selection tool, and what I'm going to do is once again I'm going to go to the layout pull down menu and I'm going to go to margins and columns. I need to remember what I've done here is that I've rotated this page. Okay, so I took it from a landscape view and I took what was the left side margin, and when I rotated it 90 degrees counterclockwise, it appears as the bottom of my page, but as far as InDesign is concerned, it's still my left side margin. So I'm going to change that from 0.25 to 0.125, and as I do that and I say OK, what that's going to do is, just as we had for the first page, is it's going to set that in such a way that these folding guides that we put in the middle of this are going to be in the center of that gutter or subdivision that we built for the page. What I need to do here is I need to put those faux column guides down just like I did on the first page of our trifold brochure template. And to make that easier, I'm going to go Command 2 so I can see the width of the entire panel on my screen here. If you're working on a Windows PC, that keyboard shortcut would be Control 2. And I'm going to go down here to the bottom panel, and I'm going to set this up so that I've got a, in this case, horizontal ruler guide. So I'm going to go to the horizontal ruler, and I'm going to bring that in to the point to where that shows. I want to make that 1875, and you'll notice I can't hit that precisely with this ruler. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that in. I'm going to click to select the guide. I'm going to take that and I'm going to highlight this. And I'm going to put exactly 1875. And it's going to place that guide precisely at 3/16 of an inch. Now I need to do the same thing here at the top of the panel. So I'm going to go into my horizontal ruler. I'm going to set this in as it's showing here at 3.125, and I'm going to bring that up to the point to where it should be 1875. Now you'll notice once again I can't hit that number. That's okay. All I have to do is, with it highlighted, put exactly that number in from the control panel, and it'll adjust that exactly the way I want it to be. I'm going to go Command 0 to go in my fit and window view. And it's time for us to save our handiwork. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go to the File pull-down menu, and I'm going to select the Save menu command. Now, as I do this, the keyboard shortcut is Command S working on the Mac platform. If you were working in the Windows platform, of course, it would be Control S. I'm going to take this, and I'm going to save this in Chapter 5 of my Project Files InDesign CS6 Essentials folder. As my first name, so it would be Randy, and in this case the number 5, so I know that's what we're doing for this section of it. And instead of saving this as an InDesign CS6 document, I'm going to save this as an InDesign CS6 template. And when I click on that, and I click the Save button, you'll see that it names the file Randy5, but instead of the INDD for InDesign document file suffix that we had in previous chapters for our InDesign CS6 course, it shows as INDT. That T stands for template. We'll show how that makes life so much easier later in our InDesign CS. We're going to automate the selection of various type attributes inside of our Total Training Trifold Brochure template here by creating paragraph and character styles for our InDesign template. Now, if you've been following along sequentially through the lessons in this course, you may recall in Chapter 1 when we added the character styles and paragraph styles buttons to our side dock as we created our TT class workspace. Now you can tell the difference between general paragraph attributes and paragraph style attributes because anytime you're dealing with a styles panel, you have these two little boxes that signify fill and stroke sitting down here to the lower left hand corner of the button. I'm going to click on the paragraph styles button, and you'll notice when I do so that the Pages panel disappears on our screen. The reason for that is one of the few limitations we have as we work with the side dock is that only one panel can be open at the time. So if I want to see both the Pages panel and the Paragraph Styles panel, what I need to do is I need to separate the two of them. I'm going to go to these two dotted lines at the very top of the character and paragraph panel group here in our side dock. I'm going to hold the mouse button down, and as I do so, I'm going to drag that down and I'm going to set it right over here to the far side of my document window. Now, as I've got those separated, it allows me to see both the Pages panel and the Paragraph Style panel at the same time. Now, I haven't damaged this irreparably. If I want to go back to my original baseline, all I have to do is go to my Workspace button right here, or go to the Window pull-down menu, and select the Reset TT Class menu command. And when I do that, what it'll do is it'll go right back to the original baseline that we've got to work with. And as we do that, we're right where we originally started. But of course, I've done this because I want to see both of those panels. So I'm going to separate them once again. I'm going to go to those two double dots. I'm going to pull it down just like so. And that'll allow me to open the Pages panel as well as the Paragraph Styles panel at the same time. Now, you'll notice as I do that it creates one style that's known as Basic Paragraph, even though we haven't asked it to do that. This contains the basic rules for whatever font is going to appear when we're working with Adobe InDesign and creating a new document. Even if we haven't chosen any unique style attributes, this is what will be used by default. Now I can create a new paragraph style by going to this flyaway menu here and selecting the menu command at the very top in the flyaway menu, but I don't want to do that. Rather, I'm going to go to this button down to the lower right hand corner of the panel, the one with the little page in the turned up corner, and click on it to create a brand new style. And when I do that, it creates one that's rather cryptically named Paragraph Style 1. I'm going to double click on that, and when I do, it opens up the Paragraph Style Options dialog box. Here's where we can set the rules that we want to maintain when we create our new paragraph style. And the first one I'm going to create is I'm going to change the name from this rather cryptic Paragraph Style 1 to Body Copy, which is in fact going to be the style that we're going to be working with. Now you'll see that it's based on no paragraph style. That just means we haven't created a brand new one. That this is going to be standing alone. We're going to be working with this from scratch. The next style is going to be the same style, which means if we're typing directly into Adobe InDesign, when I hit the return key and do the next paragraph, it also will be Body Copy paragraph style attributes and contain all of those. We also have the option to load a keyboard shortcut in here. So if you're very experienced working with this, you can call out the paragraph styles you're working with on the fly. We're not going to do that for this lesson in our InDesign course. If you look over to the left, you'll see we have a number of different layouts that are available to us as we're working and establishing our paragraph styles. Let's go to the second one here, Basic Character Formats, and as we select that, it'll allow us to see what the default font is that we'd be working with. In this case, it shows us Minion Pro. The font style is regular, 12 points on 14.4 point leading or auto leading. Kerning, tracking, case, and position are normal defaults. We're going to change these rules here to make them unique for what we're working with in our Total Training Trifold brochure template. So I'm going to change the font here from Minion Pro down to Times. If you don't have Times on your machine, you can select Times New Roman. I'm going to leave the font style regular. In this case, it shows the 4 font weights that we have available, including italic, bold, and bold italic. We're not going to select any of those here, and we'll set those up as character styles a little bit later in this unit of our InDesign CS6 course. We'll go with the regular default. We're going to take the type size and we're going to make it 13 points, and we're going to change the leading to 15 points. Now, we have kerning options. We're going to leave those as they're set. We have tracking options, which deal with how much space we artificially expand or contract to put in between individual characters. We can set the case, in this case normal, which is what we're going to leave, but we have options to set all caps, small caps or initial caps, or if we're working with an open type font, we have additional options for what we can set as all small caps with that font. We also have the ability to change the position from normal to superscript, like 7 squared, that little number that would sit above the 7, or subscript, so it would be H2O, like the little 2 that we'd put after the H for hydrogen for water. We're not going to do either of those options. Again, we'll leave it back at normal. We have the ability to set that type to be underlined, a strike through, ligatures, which put consonant pairs together to set the type just a little more stylishly. We'll leave that on. And then no break, which doesn't allow us to set soft returns inside that document. It'll try to put all that type onto a single line inside of our text frame, unless we chose to manually break that ourselves. So, if you've got your basic character format set to Times, or Times New Roman if you don't have Times, regular weight, 13-point type on 15-point leading, and we've left all the default settings, you're on the right track. Let's go to the next layout, and we're going to go to Advanced Character Formats. What this does is this allows us to set a horizontal scale number, a vertical scale number, so we can compress or expand the type from side to side or high and low. We're actually going to reduce the width of this type ever so slightly by going down from 100% to 95%. That slightly compresses the width of our type characters and allows us to fit a few more characters on the line. We can change the baseline shift to move it above or below where that type would normally be set for each line, and we can skew or slant that type to, say, for example, create artificial slanted type for a font that we don't have an italic weight for. We're not going to change any of that here. You'll notice at the bottom of this layout that we have a language option, and in this case it shows my default as English USA, as I'm recording this with the American version of the software. If I click on these two arrows to the right, it'll show all of the various options that we have available inside of our options box. Now, if I chose, for example, to make this French, it wouldn't automatically translate any type that I put into InDesign into a brand new language. What this does is this sets the rules for hyphenation and justification for type that we create within InDesign, determining where soft returns would come to break one line down to the next, or if it can't fit the entire word on line, to set the rules for how to break up that word with hyphens between syllables as that soft return goes from one line of type to the next line of type that we set within our text frame. So if you have a setting of horizontal scale of 95% and no other changes, everything's all set. You're doing good. Let's go to indents and spacing next. What we're going to do in this case is talk about the options that we have available. Now I can set this type to align to the left, which means it would have a ragged margin over to the right. I could center it or set it to align right, which would put the ragged margin to the left. I have options for justifying it, so I'd have even flush margins to the left and right side of that type. We're not going to change anything here. We'll leave it left for the default. I have a couple of checkboxes immediately below. One to balance ragged lines, so for example, if I had a very short line with a soft return to go to a longer line that had a soft return to go to a much smaller line, in those three lines, InDesign would automatically try to balance that out so that would be more even and there wouldn't be such big gaps between the smaller lines and the larger ones. We're not going to select that, but we are going to choose Ignore Optical Margin. And what that translates into is what's known as hanging punctuation. So for example, if you have quotation marks at the very start of a line of type, or you have punctuation like question marks or commas or periods at the end of that line, what this will do is it will allow InDesign to set what's known as hanging punctuation. That punctuation will actually push a little bit outside of the edges of the text frame, actually allowing you, as you're working with that, to line up the type more evenly within the text frame itself. Now beneath that, we have an option for setting a left side indent, a right side indent, or a first line or a paragraph indent. So we could make that a positive number, for example, to set a paragraph indent. Or if we're setting bulleted or numbered lists, we could actually turn that into a negative indent that would allow that to hang the number or bullet that we set outside of our left side margin. We also have the ability to set space before and after, and to set grid alignment options if we've set up what's known as a type grid for working with the fonts inside of our InDesign document. So if you have the settings for the alignment to left, the ignore optical margin checkbox selected, and you have not changed any of the other options that are available here, again, you're on the right track. We're ready to continue to the next layout, which is the tabs layout. Now, if you've worked with word processing programs like Microsoft Word or WordPerfect, and you've used tabs to align from a tab ruler working with your word processing program, this should look very familiar to you. It works just like it would in a word processing program. So for example, we have these two right-angled triangles, the lower one for my left side margin, the top one for my first line margin. Let's move both of those in by putting our cursor right on that lower triangle and moving it into a half of an inch. Then go to the top triangle and move it back to the left so we have a negative indent of a half an inch. And then let's go to this triangle and we'll move it in a half an inch as well. Now, what I've done is I've set up a hanging indent or negative indent that matches up for a half-inch left side margin and a half-inch right side margin side of my column guides. If I go back to indents and spacing, you'll actually see that these numbers are also listed. So I can set them with precise numerical control the same way that I was dragging them back and forth in that tabs layout. Now I'm going to change these back to 0, first by making a mistake here and going to this left indent. I'm going to make that 0. And when I hit the tab key, what will happen is that InDesign will complain and say that there's an invalid indent value. Indents cannot extend outside the text frame. What that means is when you set a negative indent like we have right here for that first line indent, you have to change that first. So I'm going to make it 0. And when I do that, now I'll be able to make that left side margin 0. And when I hit the tab key, InDesign won't squawk at me, and I can make the right indent 0 once again. When I go back to the tabs layout, I'll see everything set back at the default. Now I can also lay tabs inside this ruler area. I've got a left justified tab, which means wherever the tab position is, the text is going to go off to the right. I have a center justified tab, which would take whatever text I set at a tab position and space it evenly left and right to whatever that tab position would be. I have a right justified tab, which means the text would go off to the left. The little hint I've got is that's the way that tail looks. For the right justified tab, it points to the left, just as for the left justified tab, that tail points to the right. I also have the ability to set decimal or other specified character tabs, which allows me to, for example, line up numbers if I'm building a table for tabulations or to show a balance sheet of some sort, or to line up dissimilar decimal figures evenly when I'm working with tables in my InDesign document. Now, placing a tab is just as easy as it would be in a word processing program like Microsoft Word. All I have to do is go to this white space above the ruler, and when I click the mouse button, what it's going to do is it's going to place a tab at that position. In this case, because my left justified tab was highlighted, that's what it puts on the ruler. Now I can drag these and move them to where I want them to be. I can also set that with precise numerical controls. So in this case, what I can do is I can highlight that, backspace, and hit the tab key. And when I do that, it will move that precisely to a half inch. So I can set it with precise numerical control. I can set a leader for that if I want to. So for example, if I put a dot leader there, it will set dots ahead of my tab position. If I wanted dashes instead, I could place that in there as well, or really any character that I want to put in that position. For whatever rule, I can repeat those tabs just clicking on this button right here. So if I do that, it'll set a tab at every half an inch. If I want to get rid of tabs, it's as easy as just selecting them and dragging them off of that space above the ruler, just like so. Or in this case, since we don't really want any tabs, I can clear them all and go back to our default settings. Let's go next to the paragraph rules layout. And as I select this, it gives me options to set rules above and rules below my individual paragraph. To show you what these options are, I'll just check the Rule On box for just a moment. And as I do that, I'll see by default it would set a weight of 1 point. I could make that as small as a 1/4 point if I wanted to, or as large as 100 points, approximately 1.5 inches deep. Or I could set any figure in between here as I'm working with that. The type of lines are the same as they'd be available working in my control panel. So if I chose, I could set dashed lines or dotted lines or wavy lines. We're not going to do anything from the default. For the color, it's set by the text color by default, but if I click on these option box arrows right here, I'll see that it shows all of the swatches that I have loaded inside of the document. So if I chose, I could make it black, I could make it paper colored, or I could use any of the process color swatches that are loaded in InDesign by default right now. Cyan, magenta, or yellow, or if I'm working in RGB terms, red, green, or blue. We're not going to do anything here, so I'll just leave that text color by default. If I'd chosen a dotted or dashed line, I could set gap colors and tints, just like I could for the stroke itself for a solid one, for text color and tints of whatever swatch I pick. I can make the width of that the same as the column or the text frame, less the margins that I set inside, or I could make it only as wide as the text. And I have options to set indents, so I could move that line in from the left and the right edge of my text frame or column that I set, or I have the option to move it up or down with the offset and setting that above or below where that line would normally be. Let's go next to the Keep Options layout. And what this does is this allows me to set rules for keeping a paragraph of type in relationship to paragraphs before or after. So in this case, for example, if I click on the Keep with Previous box, it would allow me to either have enough room to place a paragraph of body copy and the previous paragraph of it, or what it would do is it would automatically skip that to the next line as a column or page to take that to the next area if there wasn't enough room to set it at the bottom of a column. We also have Keep Lines Together option available. So for example, I can keep all the lines in a paragraph together. So if I have a 3-deck headline, for example, 3 lines, it will either keep all of those on one column or page, or it will automatically move them all to the next, as well as setting rules for how it corresponds to the start or end of another paragraph. I also have the rules that allow me to start a paragraph anywhere, or if I choose in the next column, frame, or on the next page. We'll work with this a little bit later as we're dealing with long documentation in Chapter 7. Let's go next to hyphenation. And in this case, we have the ability to set rules for how InDesign will break up syllables of a word if there's not enough room to put the entire word on a line before it places a soft return. So we could say, for example, rules for how many characters would have to be on the line before that soft return or after that soft return as we're working with it. We can set the hyphenation zone or the range to where that would be defined. By default, this is set up at anywhere within a half an inch of the right side margin. InDesign starts looking for a place to either lay down a space and do a soft return to the next line, or if there's not enough room to hold the entire word, it'll start looking for places where it's going to put that hyphen to break that word up to go between one line and the next. Of course, if you want no hyphenation, all you have to do is turn that check mark off, and none of these options are available. Let's go next to justification. And as I select that, what this does is this allows me to set the rules for how spacing between individual words and letters will be affected as it tries to determine where it's going to place that soft return, where text is going to go from one line and be broken into the next line. And we're actually going to tighten this up a little bit with the word spacing. We're going to change that minimum from 80% to 85%, and we're going to change that maximum from 133 down to 115%. We'll leave the desired at 100%, or what's known as an M space, or how much room a lowercase m would take up as we're working with spaces in between the words. The tighter we make this, the harder the math is for InDesign, but the more even results we get as we work with the type. We're not going to change any rules for letter spacing or glyph scaling here. These will be sufficient for what we're looking to do. Let's go to auto leading, which, as I said, you don't want to use, but this is where that setting of 120% of whatever my font size comes into play. Remember, as I discussed before, you always want to use an absolute value when you're setting leading for your paragraph styles. It just saves you from rude surprises. And this also gives us rules for how we would deal with a single word that goes across a line, as well as rules for how Adobe InDesign determines where breaks will happen from line to line as we're setting a paragraph of type. And we're not going to change any of those standards from the default. Let's go next to the span columns layout. And if we're working with multi-column text frames, which we'll demonstrate later in this InDesign CS6 course, I've got the ability to set a paragraph style so that it can span columns. So for example, I could take a header and have it span 3 columns, so it would go all the way across whatever text would follow below. Or I could set it to split column. So if I have a list, say, of information that would fit, I could break that down into halves or thirds, so I could set that type a little bit tighter vertically as it gave me multiple lines horizontally within the text frame. The drop caps and nested styles layout allows me to set large initial caps for a single letter or multiple letters as I'm working with type to apply a stylistic effect, or to set nested styles, which allow me to build multiple character styles within a single paragraph or a single line of type. So I could set different rules, say, for a product description and pricing and shipping for a catalog description, just to give an example. We have the ability to set rules for grep styles, to set bullets and numbering, so we could set numbers for a number style. So for example, I could say whether I wanted those to be Roman numerals or I wanted to set different Arabic number options. I could set character styles and modes as I'm working with this, a number of options that I have available. We're not going to do any of that right here. I can set the character color just like we talked about previously with the paragraph rules. Anything that's loaded into a swatch in InDesign can be selected to be my character color as I'm working with this layout for my paragraph style options. I can take advantage of unique open type features if the font I choose for my paragraph style is what's known as an open type font. I can set rules for underline options and strike through options if I check those boxes when we were working with our basic character formats. And finally, I have the export tagging layout, which I can use if I'm working with digital or interactive documents in InDesign. It gives me the ability to set rules for HTML styles for setting my type. Or if I'm working with PDF, I can put paragraph tag formats to that. We'll cover this in detail in Total Training's InDesign Interactivity course that will be offered shortly. So let's go to the first layout option, back to General. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a really quick look at what we've set for our style. Before you get done with creating a paragraph style, you want to make a check at these style settings, which in this case means it's got no paragraph style, which means we're creating a brand new style from scratch. It's not related to anything else. The next style is set to the same style. Again, what that means, if I'm typing within InDesign and I hit the return key or the enter key, the next paragraph will be the same style as the previous one. The font is Times, or Times New Roman if you don't have Times. 13 points on 15-point leading. The character width has been compressed just slightly to 95% of its original size, and the word spacing has been narrowed from 133 to 115% maximum, and the minimum has been brought up from 80 to 85%. Now you see here it shows a rule above. Drat, I made a mistake here. If I go back to my paragraph rules, I'll turn that off. That's the reason why we want to check those general styles, because it allows me to see before I create or use that style that it matches up to exactly what I wanted to do. And when I turned off that paragraph rule style, you notice it no longer shows in my style settings. And then finally, we set it to ignore that optical margin, which means it allows that hanging punctuation that allows me to set type more evenly within the text frame. So if your body copy style settings match mine here, click the OK button and we will have created the first paragraph style for working with our InDesign trifold brochure. Now we're going to create some variations on that by going to the Character Styles panel, and what we're going to do is we're going to create 3 variations, as I said earlier: a bold character style, a bold italic character style, and then an italic character style. So let's begin by clicking on the Create New Character Style button, and there's my character style 1. I'm going to double click on that, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this one Body Copy Bold. Now that's going to be based on none because we don't have any character styles loaded in. We could load in a shortcut. We're not going to do that. Now you'll notice that I have some of the options that we had available previously with our paragraph style options, but not all of them. These are the ones that deal specifically with typed characters. And we'll begin with our basic character formats. And because we haven't created a new style, you'll notice everything is blank. I'm going to go to the font family and I'm going to make it Times. Notice in this case what it does, it shows a series of fonts that we've used recently. And since we use Times, I can select that right here at the top. I don't have to go scrolling through a long list of them. If you don't have Times on your machine, you can select Times New Roman. I'm going to change the font style from regular to bold. I'm going to take the size, I'm going to make it 13 points. I'm going to take the leading, I'm going to make it 15 points. I'm not going to do anything different with the kerning than we had before. I'm not going to do anything different from the tracking than what we had before. Certainly I'm not going to change the case or the position of that type. And I'm not going to set any of these options right here. Let's go to the advanced character formats. Now again, these are set by default. So you don't see it, but that's 100%. The vertical scale is 100% as well. Baseline shift is a default of 0, and the skew is 0. The language is not selected. Let's do that. We'll just make that English USA to match up with what we did for the first paragraph style. And then we're going to take the horizontal scale and we'll make it 100%, since we're going to make that type just a little bit bolder. We're going to let that be a little bit wider as well. We could set the character color. We're not going to change anything here, nor are we going to do anything for the open type features, underline options, strike through options, or export tagging, although I'm going to explain here that as we're doing this, we could actually set that up to be strong, which would match up with bolding digital type, the same way we're setting it bold to match up for print type for our InDesign template. So I'm going to go back to General, and we're going to check the rules. And in this case, what we've done is we take the style settings and we've made them times, bold, with a character width of 100%. When I say OK, what we'll have done is we'll have changed character style 1 into body copy bold. I'm going to create a second style based on the first one. Double click on this, and we'll make this one body copy bold ITAL for bold italics. Will be based on body copy bold. Now you don't see it here, but what that says is that says times 13 points on 15-point leading, and in this case set for the bold style. When I click on the basic character formats, that's exactly what it shows. Let's change that font style and make that bold italic. We're not going to change anything from the advanced character formats, color, any of these other things, except in this case, we'll leave that tag off as we're working with that. So I'll go back to General, and what it's going to say is it's going to have all the attributes of body copy bold, except in this case it's going to be bold italic. I'm going to say OK. There's my second variation. Let's create just one more. Double click on that. In this case, we'll call it body copy ITAL. And again, we'll base that on that body copy bold. Go to the basic character formats and change that from bold italic to italic and say OK. And we will have created our 3 character styles that are based on body copy. Now, if I want to take the italic and put it above that bold and bold italic, that's easy to do. I just hold the mouse button down and I drag it up above like so, and I can change those orders in such a way that it makes it convenient for me to work with it. Now, one last thing you want to do whenever you're working with character styles, once you're done setting them up, you want to make sure none that's selected. Otherwise, what will happen is that character style will override whatever font rules that you set when you're formatting type, and you'll drive yourself absolutely crazy trying to figure out how that works. Let's go back to the paragraph styles one last time. And what we're going to do is we're going to create another brand new style. So I'm going to click on Basic Paragraph. I'm going to click on the Create New Style button. Double click on that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this Headline, H-E-D-L-I-N-E. I'm misspelling that intentionally. It's an old journalism trick to let folks know that we're dealing with type for a headline as opposed to spelled correctly and accidentally finding it inside of our type. Now I want this to be based on no paragraph style because we're building a new one from scratch. But I will change the next style from the same style down to body copy. What that does is that takes it in such a way that if I'm typing a headline, when I hit the return key, the next paragraph will be body copy. So we're setting up cascading style sheets just like you would if you were working within a word processing program like Microsoft Word or WordPerfect. Let's go to basic character formats. What we're going to do in this case is we're going to change the font family from that default of Minion Pro. We're going to go all the way to the top here, and we'll make it Arial. We'll take the font style. We're going to make that bold italic. We'll take the font size. We're going to make it 18 points over 18-point leading. Again, we always want to set an absolute value for leading whenever we're creating paragraph or character styles. It saves us from rude surprises. Let's go to the advanced character formats. We're going to leave everything just as it is right here. Let's go to indents and spacing. Again, we're going to leave everything as it is right here. We're not going to load any tabs or paragraph rules in it, but we are going to stop at the keep options. And as we do that, we're going to add in a couple of things. One of them is we're going to select this Keep Lines Together checkbox. And we're going to select first the radio button for all lines in a paragraph. In this case, what that's going to do is that's going to keep all of the lines in the paragraph together. So as we talked about just a little bit earlier, if I have a 2 or 3 line headline, that's all going to fit in the bottom of a column or a page, or if it doesn't have enough room, it will automatically bounce that to the next page. We're going to go above this now, and we're going to go with this Keep With Next, and we're going to set that to keep with the next 2 lines. What that means is if I type a header or headline that says conclusion, I'm not going to have to go to the next page to find out what the heck I concluded if that's at the bottom of the page. If there's not enough room for at least the next 2 lines of the next paragraph, the body copy that says whatever I conclude, it's automatically going to move that headline and those first 2 lines of type to the top of the next column or the next page. Now I don't want any hyphenation in my header, so I'm going to turn that off. And we're basically all set here. Let's go back to General, and what I'll see is my headline is now based on no paragraph style. The next style is body copy, so if I'm typing a headline and I hit the return key, what will happen is the next paragraph will be body copy. I won't have to call that out from the style panel. The font is Arial, the weight is bold italic, the type size is 18 points on 18-point leading. There's no hyphenation. The keep lines together have all the rules to keep together, so all of that headline is going to fit in the bottom of a column of a page, or it's going to skip to the next one if there's not enough room for all of it, and the same with the next 2 lines of the paragraph that's set. I'm going to say OK, and as we do that, we'll have 2 paragraph styles, one for headline, one for body copy, that we can use when we're actually filling in our trifold brochure template. In this unit of our InDesign CS6 course, we're going to build a custom color swatch that we're going to use for reproducing total training graphics inside of our trifold brochure. We're going to save that inside the template, but before we do that, what we're going to do is we're going to return this paragraph and character style panel group back to the side dock. We could do that by going to the workspace button here or to the window pull down menu and selecting the reset TT class default, but I actually want to do that a little bit differently. I'm going to shrink this back into the group, and then I'm going to go to those 2 double dots just like so. I'm going to hold the mouse button down, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to place this between the swatches and the text wrap buttons in the side dock where it was originally at. So as I move my cursor inside of here, in this case if I let loose of the mouse button right now, it would place all of that between Align and Pathfinder. If I want to place it between a group, I want to get to a spot where I see a narrow line between the panel groups just like so. So as I said, I wanted to place this between swatches and text wraps. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll this up, holding the mouse button down, till I get to the point right between swatches and text wrap. When I hit the correct spot, I'll see that narrow blue line between those 2 buttons, and when I release the mouse button, that's where it'll place that panel group. Now, I'm done with the pages for right now. As I said, we're going to create a brand new swatch. So I'm going to click on the Swatches panel button in our side dock. And as I do that, I'll see the default colors that are actually built into here. I've got transparent or none. I've got registration, which would actually print on every separation that we're working with. I have paper, which translates right now as white. No cyan, magenta, yellow, or black as we're talking about reproduction. I have black, which translates as 100% key color black or that grayish cobalt black, as well as process color models for cyan, magenta, and yellow, which I would normally use for process color for print applications, as well as translations for red, green, and blue, which I would use for color process translations for interactive or digital documents. Since when we first created this template, we said its purpose was to be a print document, those have all been translated into process colors. That's what these gray boxes mean right here. And they've been translated into 4-color process, or cyan, magenta, yellow, and black terms. We're going to create a brand new swatch. Now, as I've got this done, I don't have anything in. I could click on one of these and it would give me the option to do that, but I'm not going to do that button from here because it would start from wherever we had it before. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to go select the new color swatch from the flyaway menu for that panel. And as I do that, it's going to allow me to define a brand new color. Now, you may remember as I did this that I actually had that process blue selected, 100% cyan. So that's what it's going to show here as a default. Now, by default, InDesign wants to define colors in process color terms. For print, that's cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, the 4-color process that it shows right here. If we were working in digital or interactive publication design, it would define that in red, green, and blue primary channel terms. But we're actually going to use a different model for defining this color. When I select these, I've got these 3 process color models, CMYK and RGB, at the very top of my color mode options box, as well as a scientific definition lab color, which is basically lightness and then A or B channels that break up to define whatever colors we're looking for across the spectrum. We also have the ability to define what are known as spot color book or spot color channels. And the one I'm going to select is Pantone Plus Solid Coated for my book colors. And what this does, this brings in literally hundreds of colors to choose from. Now, spot color is a little bit different than working with process color. Let me explain as an example. Let's say that I wanted to pick a color green that I wanted to put in my trifold brochure. If I was using a green spot color, the printer would literally be putting green ink into the printing press. It would either print that color, that specified spot color that's certified to print exactly the same way when the ink is correctly mixed, or it would not. Process color of that same green would basically break that down into CMYK terms. So it would be some component of cyan blue and this bright lemon yellow with maybe a little bit of magenta or black built in to make it lighter or darker. But primarily, it would be made up of some combination of these 4 process colors that we see on the top part of our swatches panel. So process color is very good when you want to print a wide range of colors. You want a colorful piece. If you're only printing a 1-color or 2-color job, say black and whatever our mystery green would be, it would probably be more economical for you to simply print that as a spot color for that green. With that said, let's pick the specific blue that Total Training uses for many of its collaterals, and that's what's known as Pantone 288 blue. Now I could go through this list and get myself to exactly the spot where that would be, or if I already know the color number that I'm looking for, I can just type in 288, and what it will do is it'll automatically take that color and it will translate that. So I can create a new Pantone 288C color. Now I could add this swatch right now, but I want to make a couple of changes first. The first one I want to do is I want to switch back from Pantone Solid Coated back into a process color model. So I'm going to change that back to CMYK, and as I do, this lets me see how that Pantone 288 blue would be translated in CMYK terms. It'd be 100% cyan, which is kind of a robin's egg blue, 87.9 or almost 88% of magenta, 26.99% of a strong lemon yellow, almost 27%, and then 18.77 or not quite 19% grayish or cobalt black. That combination of these colors right here allow me to duplicate what that Pantone 288C would be in process color terms. Now I need to do one more thing. I want to make sure that that breaks across those 4 color separations, that it doesn't come out as a 5th spot color plate. Sometimes you may need to do that, but that's a very expensive extra process. And if we're already printing color photographs, we want to translate that back into process color terms. So when I select that, and then I add that swatch, what it'll do is it'll create our brand new Pantone 288C. And you'll see that little yellow box translates those percentages up. So that's got the 88%, the 27, and 19 I talked about, as opposed to the precise figures right here. This is what will be used when it prints it. That's just an approximation for what we can see as we're working with it. Now I've created the swatch I needed, so I'm going to say that's done. And as I've done so, we now have created that process color approximation of the Pantone 288 blue that we use for total training documentation. Now we've done a fair amount of work, so let's go to our File pull-down menu and select the Save command. Keyboard shortcut for that is Command S if you're working on a Mac like we are for this chapter of our InDesign CS6 course. If you're working on a PC, it would be Control S. As I select that, it's going to save that file, that your first name number 5.indt or template file for our trifold brochure. I'm going to illustrate the 3 basic differences there are between InDesign template files, like the template for the trifold brochure that we've built right here, and InDesign document files, which we've already created in a couple of instances working up to this point. To illustrate the first difference, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the File pull-down menu, and I'm going to select the Save As command. Keyboard shortcut for that is Command-Shift-S if you're working on a Mac machine like we are for this chapter of our InDesign CS6 course, or if you're working on a PC, Control-Shift-S. I'm just going to click it from the menu though, and as I pull up the Save As dialog box, what I'll see is that by default, what it wants to do is it wants to create an InDesign CS6 document file that I've been working with. That would be the INDD files that we've seen previously. If I change that to an InDesign CS6 template, what it would do is it would save that as INDT. Now I have one more option. If I'm saving this back to previous versions of InDesign for someone else to work on, I can save that as what's known as an IDML interchange file that's compatible with CS4, CS5, and CS5.5 versions of InDesign, as well as working with the InDesign CS6 that we're learning today. So I'm going to select that InDesign CS6 template file, and I'm going to save that file in Chapter 5. Because I already have one created, it's going to ask, do I want to replace that because it already exists? And in this case, because it is exactly what I want for the file, I'm simply going to say replace it. And what that'll do is that will create my new template. That's the first difference between InDesign template files and InDesign document files, the file suffix that exists at the end of it. The second difference I'm going to show you right now. I'm going to hide Adobe InDesign by going to the InDesign pull-down menu and selecting Hide InDesign. And when I do that, that'll bring me to the desktop for where I'm working on Chapter 5. Now you'll see that I've got a couple of files right here. One of them is my randy5.indt file. I also have this temporary file that shows up right here. Anytime you've got an InDesign document or template or interchange file open, a temporary file is also stored in that directory. So if for some reason InDesign should crash, or as I once had happen, somebody hits a light pole 2 blocks away and takes out the power for the entire block, this temporary file is kind of a mini save and will get you almost all the way to where you were before you had that root interruption to your InDesign file. Now, I'm going to switch very quickly to the icon view. And as I do that, I can see the second difference between InDesign document templates and InDesign document files. If you look here, this icon shows a little INDT and that there's a page turned off to the bottom. I'm going to go back to my cover flow view and I'm going to go back to Chapter 2. And as I do that, and I change once again to the icon view, what I'll see is the InDesign document file that we created way back in Chapter 2. You'll notice in this case, it's got a little INDD that's set to the top and kind of offset to the left. It's got this little tab to the top, and it uses that INDD file suffix. So basically, there are two differences that we've talked about here when you're working with InDesign template files as opposed to InDesign document files. As I go back to Chapter 5 and to the icon view, you'll see that the icon is a little bit different and that the file suffix is a little bit different. So this is difference number 1 and difference number 2. I'll show you what difference number 3 is when we go into the next chapter of our InDesign CS6 course.